Close the door, turn off the light, and let the rain outside be the only witness. Tonight, I'll share with you stories that should never be seen, and perhaps should never be told. They are not fables, nor the kind of tales you'll find in books. These are fragments, whispers about things people encountered in the dark, things no one was meant to witness. So sit back, let the storm keep time for us, and listen closely. Because once you hear them, you may begin to notice shadows where you never looked before. Story 1. The old woman on the empty road. The rain had been falling for hours, soft at first, now hard enough that each drop felt like a stone against the windshield. David guided the wheel with steady hands, the wipers dragging across the glass with their tired rhythm. The highway was empty, no headlights ahead, no glow of taillights behind. It was the kind of silence that pressed in on a man, broken only by the hum of his engine and the long sigh of the storm. He told himself he didn't mind. He was used to nights like this. Deliveries had made him a creature of the road, a man who measured time not by clocks but by the distance between towns. He took pride in it being able to drive through rain, through darkness, through the hours when the world was asleep. But tonight, something felt heavier. The air in the cab seemed colder than it should have been. His breath misted faintly on the glass, though the heater still blew warm. The further he drove, the stranger the night became. The trees on either side leaned closer to the road, their branches thrashing in the wind. Each flash of lightning carved them into crooked silhouettes, and in the afterimage, he thought he saw faces in the bark. He blinked, rubbed his eyes. Fatigue. That was all. Just fatigue. Then the radio muttered. Not a voice, not music, just a flicker of static, a broken crackle as though some distant station was trying to claw its way through. He reached for the dial, but before his fingers touched it, the sound was gone, leaving only the rain. That was when he saw her. At first, she was nothing more than a pale shape in the darkness, blurred by the sheets of water. He leaned forward, squinting through the wipers. A woman, standing in the middle of the road, her back to him. Her shoulders bowed slightly, a dark shawl clinging to her frame. David eased his foot off the accelerator. Out here, at this hour, there were no houses nearby, no cars parked on the shoulder, just her. He slowed to a crawl. The headlights poured over her, bright against the black ribbon of asphalt. The storm lashed at everything, but she never shifted. She didn't even seem wet. The rain fell all around her, but her hair, her shawl, her thin arms bone dry. David's grip tightened on the wheel. He wanted to roll the window down, to shout, to ask if she needed help, but the words stuck in his throat. Something in the back of his mind begged him not to speak, not to call attention to himself. So he tried to pass. The truck inched closer, edging to the left. The lights swept across her, and for the briefest second he thought she glowed, not with the reflection of the beams, but with something inside her skin. His chest went tight. He couldn't breathe, and then she moved. Not her shoulders, not her feet, just her head. It turned slowly, impossibly, until the chin pressed against her spine. Her body remained fixed forward, rigid as stone, but her face stared into his cab. The eyes were hollow, darker than the night itself. David's pulse crashed in his ears. He tried to look away, but the empty sockets locked on him, dragging him into their depth. For one awful moment, he thought her lips moved, and through the hammer of the rain, he could swear he heard his name. David. His hands jerked. The wheel twisted. Tires screamed against the wet asphalt, the truck fishtailing wildly before skidding toward the ditch. The impact came with a dull, crushing thud. Steam hissed from beneath the hood, swallowed by the storm. For a long moment he sat frozen, chest heaving, knuckles white against the wheel. The road ahead was empty. The old woman was gone. But in the hollow of his skull, the whisper of his name still lingered like someone had spoken it from the inside out. David's breath rasped in the cab, shallow and uneven. His hands refused to leave the wheel, as if letting go would invite something else to take it. He forced himself to count 1, 2, 3, steadying his chest, but each number came out broken, scattered by panic. The rain had softened to a steady hiss, no longer the violent pounding it had been minutes earlier. That made the silence inside the cab worse. The engine ticked faintly as it cooled, the smell of burned oil and wet metal filling the air. He reached for the ignition with a trembling hand, turned the key. The starter coughed, whined, but refused to catch. Once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. Only the clicking sound of failure, muffled by the storm. David swore under his breath and slumped back. His headlights had dimmed to a weak glow, throwing pale shapes into the curtain of rain ahead. He didn't dare look too closely. Each shadow seemed to lean closer, to stretch unnaturally toward him. His heart still hammered. He told himself it had been a trick of the light, exhaustion, maybe even a hallucination. People saw things when they drove too long, when sleep weighed heavy on the eyes. He repeated it silently, like a prayer. Just fatigue, just the storm, nothing more. A flicker of blue broke the night. David's head snapped up. In the rearview mirror, a light bloomed on the horizon. A single vehicle, slow, steady. The glow grew stronger until he could make out the pulsing strobe of a police cruiser's bar. Relief hit him like air after drowning. He opened the door and stepped into the rain, waving both arms. The cruiser eased to a stop behind his truck, its headlights cutting sharp beams through the mist. The driver's door opened. A young officer stepped out, pulling his hat lower against the drizzle. He looked no older than 25, with a clean uniform and an easy stride. "You all right there, sir?" the officer called, voice carrying over the rain. David exhaled, shoulders sagging. "Yeah, I mean no. The truck's dead. I swerved." His voice cracked. He wanted to tell it all, every detail, but the words tangled in his throat. The officer approached, boots splashing in the puddles. His expression was calm, almost casual. "Long night? Storm will do that. Roads get slippery. Lucky you didn't flip the thing." David rubbed his face with both hands, feeling the grit of sweat and rain. It wasn't the storm. There was someone, an old woman, right in the road. The officer tilted his head. "Out here?" "Yes," David snapped, sharper than intended. She was standing in the middle of the lane. "I tried to go around, but his voice faltered. His mind replayed the impossible image. Her head turning too far, the sockets empty and bottomless. He swallowed hard. She wasn't right. The officer stopped a few feet away, studying him. The cruiser's light spun lazily, coloring the wet pavement in blue and red. "Not right how?" he asked softly. David hesitated. He felt foolish saying it out loud, but silence pressed heavier. Her head. It turned, all the way around. She looked straight at me, but her body didn't move. The rain drummed steadily between them. For a moment, the officer said nothing. Then slowly, he smiled. But the smile didn't touch his eyes. "Well," the officer said, his voice low, almost amused. "Like this?" And as David stared, the young man began to turn his head. Not fast, not jerky, but with a smooth, dreadful patience, as though each vertebra uncoiled on command. Past the point of pain, past the limits of bone, his face rotated toward his own spine, until his grin stretched at an angle no human jaw should allow. His eyes never blinked. David stumbled backward, breath ripped from his chest. His legs threatened to give way in the slick mud. The officer's smile widened, a grotesque curve that glimmered in the strobe of his cruiser lights. Then, without another word, he straightened, adjusted his hat with unnatural calm, and began walking away. Footsteps echoed on wet asphalt, slow, deliberate, fading into the rain. David stood alone by the broken truck, throat raw, heart rattling against his ribs. The whisper of his name still clung to him, but now it carried another sound: laughter, thin and distant, dissolving into the storm. David stood motionless beside his truck long after the officer's footsteps had faded. The rain softened into a drizzle, the storm drifting further down the valley, but his nerves were a storm of their own. His pulse throbbed in his throat. His knees shook. He couldn't make sense of what he had seen, what he had heard. The cruiser was gone. No taillights glowed in the distance, no hum of an engine. It was as though the vehicle had never been there at all. Only the stretch of black road remained, slick and gleaming under the dying beams of his truck's headlights. David pressed a palm to his chest, trying to slow the hammer of his heart. "You're in shock," he told himself. "Hallucinations, that's all. The crash rattled your brain, nothing more." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. The image of the officer's head turning smooth, deliberate, beyond human was burned into him, the way the smile had stretched without reaching the eyes. That wasn't a trick of exhaustion. That wasn't rain playing games with his vision. He turned toward the cab of the truck, desperate for shelter. He slid inside, slammed the door shut, and locked it with a shaky hand. The silence inside felt too thin, as though it couldn't quite hold back what waited outside. He drew in a breath, but the air tasted stale, heavy, like metal left too long in water. He checked his phone. No signal. The bars were dead, flatlined in the corner of the screen. His thumb hovered over the screen longer than it needed to, as if sheer will might force a connection to appear. Nothing. The drizzle tapped against the windshield like fingers drumming on glass. David leaned forward, squinting through the blur. The road ahead was empty, but he couldn't shake the sense of movement, as though something lingered at the edge of the beam, just out of sight. "Don't look too hard," a voice inside warned. "You'll see her again if you do." But the urge clawed at him. His eyes scanned the tree line. Branches swayed, shadows deepened, and for a moment he swore he saw a pale curve between the trunks, a bent shoulder, a shawl draped thin over fragile bones. He blinked, and it was gone. He whispered to himself, just to hear a voice, even if it was his own. "I didn't imagine it. I didn't." She was there. His words felt wrong in the air, as if the night swallowed them before they could fade. A noise broke through the rain, not the steady patter he'd grown numb to, but something heavier. A footstep, slow, measured, wet soles pressing into wet earth. David froze, every muscle locking, his ears strained. Another step, closer. He turned his head toward the driver's side mirror. Water streaked the glass, distorting the reflection, but through the blur he thought he saw a shape behind the truck. Small, thin, still. His chest tightened. He wanted to breathe, but his lungs refused. The sound came again, a dragging shuffle this time. He snapped his gaze to the windshield. The road was still empty. No one there, but the air in the cab thickened, pressing down on him, urging him not to move, not to even blink. His eyes caught something then. Out beyond the beam of the headlights, further down the road, a figure stood, small and bent, the outline of a shawl clinging to thin shoulders. The old woman. David's stomach dropped. His hand reached blindly for the ignition, twisting the key with frantic force. The engine coughed, sputtered, died. Again, nothing. When he looked up, the road was empty once more. But this time he was certain that she hadn't left. She was closer now, watching, waiting for him to open the door. The drizzle had thinned to a mist, but the world outside felt thicker, heavier, as if the night itself leaned against the truck. David's breath fogged the glass. His reflection stared back at him wide-eyed, pale, a man unraveling. He wiped a trembling hand across the window, desperate to see more clearly. The road stretched empty in front of him, yet the certainty gnawed at him. She was still there. He could feel her, the way a man feels a presence in a dark room before the light is switched on. Every nerve screamed it. A sound cracked through the quiet. Not footsteps this time, knuckles. Slow, deliberate, tapping against metal. David froze. The sound came again, a measured rap, right beneath the driver's door. He dared not move, but his eyes flicked downward, catching the faintest shadow shifting against the wet ground. His throat closed. He couldn't even swallow. The tapping stopped. Silence hung, sharp and suffocating. Then gently, the handle of the door creaked. It jiggled once, twice, testing. "No," David whispered, his voice breaking. "No, no, no." The handle stilled. For a heartbeat, he thought maybe it was over. Then he heard breathing. Not his own, this was deeper, wetter, dragging through teeth that weren't quite closed. It seeped through the thin metal, brushing his ear from the other side of the door. David lurched sideways, fumbling for the passenger seat, pressing himself away from the sound. His chest heaved, lungs pulling in air that felt too heavy to hold. A face appeared at the glass. The old woman stood inches away, her hollow sockets fixed on him. Her skin glistened pale, stretched too tight over bones, as if carved from wax. Rain didn't touch her, not a drop. Her head began to turn, slow and dreadful, pressing past its natural limits until her chin nearly grazed her spine. All the while, her eyes, or the dark absence of them, bored into him. David screamed, scrambling at the passenger door, clawing at the handle. He shoved it open and stumbled out into the night. His boots splashed into cold mud as he ran, the rain slicking his jacket, the storm swallowing his ragged breaths. He didn't look back at first. He couldn't. His only thought was distance. Distance from the truck, distance from her. But when he did glance over his shoulder, his heart stuttered. She hadn't moved. She still stood at the driver's side, head twisted, face locked toward him. But the distance between them hadn't grown. It didn't make sense. He had run a dozen paces, maybe more, but she was still there, impossibly near, as if the road itself had folded her closer. David stumbled, fell to his knees, mud splattering his hands. He clawed at the ground, trying to push himself up, but his limbs felt heavy, sluggish, as though the air itself resisted him. Then he heard it again, his name, a whisper without breath, a voice that seemed to vibrate inside his skull. David. The sound uncoiled through him, paralyzing his muscles, freezing the scream in his throat. His vision blurred. The world dimmed, but her figure remained sharp, impossibly sharp, against the haze. And as the night closed tighter, he realized escape might no longer be possible. She didn't need to move to reach him. She was already here. David knelt in the mud, rain clinging to his skin, though he no longer felt its chill. His eyes locked on the figure by the truck, the woman, unblinking, her head still twisted too far, her face still turned toward him no matter how far he tried to crawl. The whisper of his name circled through the storm, soft, endless, without source. Then came a new sound, tires crunching on wet asphalt. David's heart lurched. Light swept across the road, slicing through the mist. A car rolled closer, blue and red flashing weakly through the curtain of rain. A police cruiser. Again. No, David whispered, voice raw, breaking apart. He had already seen this, already lived this. The memory and the moment blurred. The cruiser stopped behind his truck. The door opened with the same practiced slowness. The same young officer stepped out, hat low, boots splashing against the pavement. His stride was identical, each footfall too familiar, too rehearsed. Rough night, sir? The officer's voice carried warm and steady, just as before. David's breath came in ragged bursts. You. His throat closed. I saw you. I saw what you did. You're not... The officer tilted his head. Smile faint, polite, though his eyes glimmered with something darker. You must be shaken. Sometimes the storm plays tricks. Sometimes it shows us things that aren't really there. Behind him, the old woman still waited by the truck, her presence untouched by the rain, her sockets hollow and fixed. David's chest tightened. He looked from one figure to the other, the officer and the woman, and felt the world collapsing in on itself. The officer stepped closer, his boots echoing in the quiet stretch of road. Tell me again, he said softly. You said she turned her head? Like this? His neck began to twist. Slowly, patiently, vertebra by vertebra, until his grin stretched at the same impossible angle. His eyes never blinked. His body never shifted. David staggered backward, but the road behind him gave no escape. The trees loomed close. The shadows pressed tighter. He tried to scream, but the sound died in his throat, choked by the weight of their gaze. The officer's steps faded, deliberate, unhurried, as if walking away, but the sound of his boots never grew distant. It circled, echoed, as though footsteps fell on every side at once. David turned wildly. The woman was gone from the truck. He spun again, and she stood at the edge of the trees, head twisted, face aimed at him. He spun once more. The officer's shape was there too, standing just beyond the headlights, his neck still bent at that dreadful angle. They were everywhere. David clutched at his chest, at his breath, desperate for air that would not come. The rain washed down his face, though it no longer felt like water. It felt like the cold touch of hands he could not see, drawing him deeper into their circle. The whispers rose, not one voice, but two, twining together, old and young, hollow and human, repeating his name, over and over, until the sound filled every corner of him. David, and on that empty road, between the storm and the silence, he understood he would not leave. Not tonight, not ever. The bell of the departed. The funeral had ended only hours ago, but Chloe still felt the chill of it clinging to her skin. The black clothes stuck damply to her, heavy with the smell of rain and lilies. Her shoes left faint wet prints as she pushed open the door to her small apartment and stepped inside. The place greeted her with silence. She flicked the light switch, and the single bulb above hummed to life, casting a pale, uneven glow across the living room. She closed the door quickly behind her, locking it, as though she could keep the grief outside. Her body moved automatically, coat off. Bag dropped, shoes kicked into the corner, but her mind replayed the day in fragments. Ben's face in the framed photograph, the sound of weeping echoing in the chapel. The coffin lowered into the earth with a dull finality. She whispered his name, barely audible. Ben. The word tasted like ashes. Her phone buzzed. The vibration rattled against the wooden counter where she had left it. She glanced over without much thought, expecting another sympathy text she didn't want to read. But her chest tightened when she saw the screen. Incoming call. The name glowing there froze her breath. Ben. Her first reaction was disbelief. The name was still saved in her contacts, of course, but it couldn't be him. It was impossible. Her hands trembled as the phone kept vibrating, screen flashing with each ring. She stepped closer, unable to stop herself. As though drawn by a magnet, she couldn't resist. The sound cut through the apartment like a knife. She whispered, "No, it's not real. It can't be real." The call kept coming, persistent, demanding. Chloe reached for the phone, then stopped halfway, her fingers hovering inches from it. Her whole body shook. Every instinct screamed to ignore it, to let it die out. But just before the ringing ceased, the call connected on its own. The screen went black, and from the speaker came a voice she knew too well familiar, yet ruined, as though dragged through static and earth. "Chloe." Her knees weakened. She clutched the edge of the counter to steady herself. The voice spoke again, low, fractured, carrying the weight of cold. "Chloe, I'm cold. Open the door." Her scream caught in her throat. She hurled the phone across the room, the device skidding against the floor and falling silent. But almost immediately, a new sound filled the apartment. 3 knocks at the door. Slow, steady, each one sharp enough to rattle her chest. Chloe staggered backward, eyes locked on the entrance, the cheap wood vibrating faintly from the force. She didn't dare move closer. She didn't dare breathe too loud. The knocking stopped. Silence. And then the phone began to ring again. But not from the floor, not from where she had thrown it. The sound came muffled, from inside the wardrobe. Chloe pressed her back against the wall, her palms flat against the paint as though it might hold her up. The ringing from the wardrobe was steady, muffled but unmistakable, each chime echoing with a strange hollowness, like it was not just a phone but a bell tolling in some underground place. She shook her head violently. "No, I threw it. It's on the floor. It can't be in there." Her breaths came short, broken, fogging the air in front of her. She tried to convince herself to run, to bolt down the hallway, out into the wet night, anywhere but here, but her legs wouldn't obey. They felt pinned, heavy, as though the sound itself had nailed her to the spot. The wardrobe loomed in the corner of the room. She stared at it, the white painted doors trembling faintly in the dim light. Every ring seemed to vibrate through the wood. Between each chime, silence fell too thick, like the apartment itself was holding its breath. Then came the knock again, 3 sharp raps at the front door. Her heart nearly stopped. She snapped her gaze to the entrance, her ears filling with the overlap of sounds, the ringing from the wardrobe, the knocking from the door. They pulsed together, out of sync, a cruel duet of demand. Her phone's tone rose, insistent, almost shrill. The knock grew louder. Chloe clamped her hands over her ears, but it made no difference. The sounds tunneled inside her skull. She whispered to herself again and again, "It isn't real. It isn't real. He's gone. He's gone." But a sliver of her, a small, poisoned sliver, whispered back, "What if it is him? What if he found a way back? What if he's waiting, right outside, right now?" Her eyes burned. She pressed her fists to them, but the tears came anyway. She remembered Ben's laugh, the way he leaned against the corner booth in the cafe near campus, the warmth of his hand brushing hers when they crossed the street. She remembered the sound of the crash too, the phone call that shattered it all. The ringing swelled, filling the room. The knocking pounded harder, no longer polite, no longer patient. "Let me in." The words weren't spoken aloud, but they formed in her head, clear and cold. Her body lurched forward as if pulled by strings, her feet dragging her closer to the wardrobe. Each step was torture, each ring a hook digging deeper into her chest. She stopped inches away. Her breath rattled. Her hand hovered above the wardrobe's handle, trembling so violently she thought her bones might rattle out of her skin. The ringing cut off. Silence. The sudden absence of sound was worse. The air thickened, charged, heavy with something waiting. And then, from directly behind her, at the apartment door, 3 more knocks, but softer this time, almost gentle. She spun, heart hammering, and the wardrobe began to ring again. Chloe's body trembled as if the walls themselves were vibrating through her bones. The wardrobe pulsed with sound, her phone ringing, muffled yet piercing, each note dragging her closer. At the same time, the door shook under measured knocks, the rhythm steady, deliberate, the 2 sounds braided together, knock and chime, until she could no longer separate them. Her head spun. She pressed her palms to her ears again, but it was useless. The ringing seemed to originate inside her skull now, deep and resonant, like her own bones were chiming. The knocks rattled in her chest, each one shaking her ribs. Her voice came out fractured. "Stop. Please stop." But the sounds only grew clearer. Chloe staggered back, her shoulder colliding with the kitchen counter. A glass tipped and shattered on the floor, shards scattering across the tiles. She stared at them, dazed, watching how the light from the bulb above bent and splintered through the pieces. For a moment she thought she saw Ben's reflection in the glass, his face, pale and half smiling. She squeezed her eyes shut. When she opened them, the shards only showed her own reflection wide, wild, terrified. The knocking changed. It wasn't 3 measured raps anymore. It became slower, heavier, each strike dragging like a fist, too weak to lift but too insistent to stop. "Let me in." The thought forced itself into her mind. She bit her lip until she tasted blood. "No," she whispered. "You're dead. You can't be here." The wardrobe rang again, this time louder, sharper, as though the phone were no longer muffled by wood. Chloe's eyes darted to it. The handles quivered. The white doors shifted, tiny vibrations with each chime, as if something inside pressed against them. She backed toward the apartment door, but as her fingers brushed the cold metal of the lock, her phone's ringtone cut sharply. This time, she heard more than sound. "Chloe." Her breath caught. The voice was clearer now, no longer just static and distortion. It was Ben's voice, lower, hollow, but unmistakably his. She pressed her forehead against the door, her body shaking. "You're not real. You're not real." The voice from the wardrobe answered, whispering through the chime. "I'm real enough to miss you." Chloe spun her back against the door. "Stop it," she screamed, her voice cracking. Her throat ached. "You're not him. He's gone." Silence. For a few seconds the apartment fell still. Only her breathing filled the air. Her heart pounded so hard she thought the neighbors might hear it. Then softly, almost tenderly, the knocking began again. But this time, it didn't come from the front door. It came from inside the wardrobe. Her stomach dropped. She stumbled sideways, crashing into the arm of the couch. The wardrobe shook with each knock, rattling faintly as though the wood were splintering. "Chloe." The voice was stronger now, clearer, carrying a tone she remembered from long ago. Not the distorted rasp of a grave, but the familiar cadence of her friend. "It's me, Ben." Tears blurred her vision. "No, Ben is dead. I saw them bury you. I watched the earth cover you." The chime answered her, softer now, almost mournful. "That's why I'm cold. You know it's me. Let me in. Open the door." Her mind fractured between terror and longing. She remembered his laugh, his hand on her shoulder during late-night study sessions, the way his eyes crinkled when he teased her. The memories ached, pulling her forward even as her fear screamed for her to run. The wardrobe handles rattled violently. The ringtone warped, twisting into a drawn-out shriek that seemed to echo from every corner of the apartment. Chloe clamped her hands over her mouth, biting back a sob. She pressed herself against the wall, sliding down until she sat on the floor. Her knees drew tight to her chest. The voice came again, firmer, closer. "Chloe, I'm right here. I need you. Open it." The knocking grew furious, rattling the wardrobe so hard that the doors bowed outward, the hinges groaning. Chloe screamed, a raw, broken sound, and scrambled toward the corner of the room. She grabbed the nearest thing she could, a lamp, and hurled it toward the wardrobe. The bulb burst in a flash, plunging the room into semi-darkness, the only glow coming from beneath the crack of the wardrobe doors. A pale, pulsing light. The phone was shining inside. The ringing stopped, and in the silence that followed, she heard his voice clearly, as though he stood inches away, whispering against her ear. "Don't be afraid, Chloe. It's only me." Her body shook uncontrollably. She wanted to scream again, but her throat betrayed her. All she could do was stare at the wardrobe, at the faint glow bleeding through the crack, at the doors trembling as though whatever waited inside was almost free. And for the first time, she realized she was no longer sure which terrified her more, opening the wardrobe and seeing what waited, or leaving it closed and never knowing if Ben truly was there. The wardrobe groaned as if something alive pressed from the inside, wood straining against the weight of what demanded to be let out. The pale glow spilling from its seams pulsed like a heartbeat, brightening with every second, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls of the apartment. Chloe pressed herself tighter into the corner, arms wrapped around her knees. Her breaths were jagged, shallow, as if the very air had turned too thick to swallow. She tried to tell herself to move, to run, but her body refused. She was caught in the pull of the sound. The voice of Ben had grown louder, no longer muffled, no longer distant. It wrapped around her from all sides, circling her mind, threading into her bones. "Chloe," she whimpered, shaking her head violently. "You're not him. You're not." The wardrobe shuddered. The handles rattled furiously, banging against the doors with sharp, metallic clinks. The glow inside surged brighter, illuminating the room in brief, sickly bursts, like lightning trapped in wood. "Chloe, open it." His voice was so clear now, almost warm, almost the same as she remembered except for the edges. There was a drag beneath each word, a hollow undertone, as though he spoke through water, or through earth. She pressed her hands against her ears, sobbing, but no barrier was enough. The voice was inside her head now, inside her skin. "Don't you miss me? Don't you want to see me again? Just once?" Her tears blurred everything into streaks of light and shadow. Her body shook as the memories fought against the horror, the late-night laughter, the way he leaned across the library table to whisper jokes too quiet for others to hear, the warmth of his hand brushing hers when he walked her home. She had buried those memories today, in the coffin that lowered into the earth. She had stood still while the dirt fell, telling herself it was finished, telling herself she had to let go. But here he was, and he was asking her to let him in. The wardrobe convulsed violently, the wood splintering at the edges. The doors bowed outward, groaning on their hinges, as if they were about to break. The pale glow flared brighter, bleaching the room with a light that felt wrong, a colorless heat that burned her eyes. The voice filled the air, rising above the creak and groan of wood. "Chloe, I'm so cold. Please, open the door." Her body lurched forward without her permission. Her knees scraped across the floor as she crawled toward the wardrobe, her fingertips dragging against the wood like they were drawn there by invisible threads. She screamed at herself to stop, to fight, but her voice was nothing more than a whisper lost in the storm of sound. Her hand rose to the handle. Her fingers trembled inches from the metal, the glow bathing her skin in sickly light. The banging ceased. The wardrobe went still, and in the silence, his voice came again, soft, intimate, the way it used to be when he leaned close so no one else would hear. "It's really me, Chloe. I've come back for you." Her chest caved with a sob. The last of her strength collapsed beneath the weight of longing and terror. Her fingers closed around the handle. The metal was ice against her skin. The glow swelled. The air throbbed with the sound of his name on every surface, every shadow whispering, every corner echoing. And Chloe, trembling, breathless, broken, knew she had no choice left. She pulled. The wardrobe doors creaked open. The doors gave way with a groan, opening just enough for the light to spill out. Chloe shielded her eyes, squinting into the glow. For a heartbeat, she saw nothing but pale brilliance, a colorless radiance that filled the wardrobe like smoke. Then she saw it, lying on the floor inside, half buried beneath old clothes and shoes, was a phone, Ben's phone. The screen blazed with unnatural light, brighter than any ordinary device, the ringtone frozen in a single long chime that hummed in the air. Her chest tightened. Her hand reached forward before she realized what she was doing. The globe pulled at her, beckoning her closer, the sound burrowing through her bones. Her fingers stretched toward the phone. They trembled, shaking so violently that she barely brushed the edge of it. The instant her skin touched the metal, something else closed around her hand. Cold, Not the kind of cold she knew, not the chill of winter air or ice on bare skin. This was deeper, heavier, a cold that sank through flesh and gripped her bones. Her breath snapped in her throat. She tried to yank her hand back, but the grip only tightened, and then she felt its skin. Fingers, human fingers, thin and rigid, curling around hers with desperate strength. Chloe screamed, her voice raw, torn from her chest, but the sound died in the glow, swallowed whole. The light pulsed, brighter, almost blinding, and in the searing brilliance, a voice slipped against her ear, not from the phone, not from the wardrobe, but from the space right beside her. So close she felt the cold breath against her skin. Chloe, her tears spilled freely, her body convulsing with terror. She tried to tear free, but the hand held her fast. The whisper came again, softer, almost tender. "I'm right here." The light surged one final time, then everything went dark. Story 3. The eyes in the bowl. The clock glowed faintly on Jake's nightstand, its digits bleeding red into the dark. 2:47 a.m. Again. His body ached with exhaustion, but his eyes refused to close. They hadn't for weeks, not properly. Sleep came in scraps. 10 minutes here, 15 there. Never enough to pull him under. Never enough to wash the weight from his chest. Tonight was no different. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator through the thin apartment walls. His stomach growled, a hollow, gnawing sound that felt louder in the silence. He rubbed at his face, sighed, and swung his legs out of bed. Maybe food would trick his body into surrender. Maybe something warm would fill the hollow and, for once, drag him into rest. The floor was cold beneath his bare feet as he shuffled down the narrow hallway. His apartment was the kind that never truly warmed. No matter how high he turned the thermostat, the air always clung damp, heavy, like a basement. The kitchen light buzzed when he flipped it on, casting a sickly yellow glow across the counters. Dust clung to the corners, and a faint stain of old cooking oil lingered on the stovetop. It wasn't a space he loved, but it was familiar. He reached automatically for the pot, the oats, the kettle, porridge. Simple. He had eaten it every night for the past week, the only thing his stomach could hold at these hours. He filled the pot with water and set it on the burner, the flame clicking, then roaring to life with a blue-orange bloom. Jake leaned against the counter as the water began to boil. His eyes stung. He blinked rapidly, trying to chase the blur from his vision. The room seemed to pulse with his heartbeat, the shadows bending at the edges. He told himself it was fatigue, always fatigue. When the water bubbled, he poured the oats in and began to stir. The spoon clinked softly against the pot, a rhythm almost soothing. He focused on it, letting the simple motion steady him. Round and round, scrape and drag, steam rising in pale wisps. The smell was comforting, warm, bland, familiar. He leaned over, inhaled, and for the first time that night he felt a flicker of calm. Then he saw them, two shapes, pale and round, bobbing gently in the thickening oats. At first he thought they were bubbles, bits of starch rising to the surface, but they held their shape too perfectly. White, smooth, glossed with a faint sheen as the steam curled around them. Jake froze, spoon hovering above the pot. The longer he stared, the more certain he became. They weren't bubbles. They weren't oats. They were eyes, two perfect eyeballs, drifting upward through the porridge, their milky whites gleaming in the fluorescent light. A strangled gasp escaped his throat. The spoon clattered from his hand, striking the counter and spinning to the floor. He stumbled back, nearly tripping over his own feet. His chest heaved, panic rushing through him, but he couldn't look away. The eyes floated serenely, as if the porridge were nothing more than clear water, their round shapes bobbing gently with the steam. Then one of them rolled, slowly, purposefully. Its pupil turned upward, fixing on him. Jake's back hit the opposite wall. His breath came in short, sharp bursts. He pressed a hand against his mouth, muffling the sound. His gaze flicked to the small mirror hung above the sink. His own reflection stared back at him, pale skin, dark circles bruising the flesh beneath his eyes, lips trembling. He looked like a man unraveling, a man devoured by sleepless nights. But then, the reflection changed. The eyes in the mirror shifted. They weren't his anymore. They were wider, shinier, too bright, and they weren't alone. Behind his reflection, In the dim outline of the kitchen, another pair appeared. A second set of eyes, larger, blacker, peering over his shoulder. Jake spun around, heart slamming against his ribs. The kitchen was empty, only the pot on the stove, steam curling lazily into the air. He turned back to the mirror, chest tight. His reflection looked as it always had, exhausted, hollow, but the fear clung to him, sharper than knives. He forced himself forward, snatched the knob, and twisted the burner off. The flame died with a hiss, leaving the room in silence. The porridge still bubbled faintly, the two pale orbs drifting lazily at the surface. Jake pressed both palms against the counter, his breath fogging the mirror. He whispered to himself, low, broken. It's not real. You're just tired. Just tired. But somewhere behind him, faint and brittle, came a whisper that was not his own. We found them. Jake froze, blood running cold. His mouth went dry. The whisper came again, clearer this time, as if two voices overlapped, one male, one female, both hollow. We found our eyes, and now, we need a new home. Jake spun again, desperate to catch the source, but the kitchen was empty, the shadows still. Only the bubbling of the porridge remained. They looked down. The eyes were gone. The surface of the oats was smooth, undisturbed, as though nothing had ever floated there. Jake staggered back, chest heaving. His gaze darted to the mirror, and what stared back was not him. His reflection leaned forward, closer than it should have been. Its face warped, its eyes replaced with two hollow pits of darkness. Jake cried out, stumbling away from the glass. His hands clawed at his own face, desperate to feel the solid weight of his own eyes in their sockets. They were still there. They had to be. But then he felt it. Something cold, something round, pressing gently into the hollow of his left eye. Jake's hands trembled as they pressed against his face. His fingertips traced the curve of his cheekbones, slid up to his eyes, pressed desperately against his eyelids. He needed to feel them, needed to prove they were still there. For a moment, the pressure reassured him, the soft give of flesh, the sting of nails against skin. But when he lowered his hands and forced himself to look at the mirror again, the reassurance shattered. His reflection didn't move with him. He had lowered his arms. The figure in the glass had not. Its hands still clutched at its face, frozen, covering the dark hollows where its eyes should have been. Black voids leaked from between its fingers, like smoke unraveling into the glass. Jake staggered backward, colliding with the counter so hard the pot rattled on the stove. His breath scraped the back of his throat. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to erase the image. That was when he noticed it. Darkness, not the natural kind. This was thicker, heavier, bleeding into the edges of his apartment. Corners that should have been filled with dull yellow light from the buzzing bulb now seemed deeper, stretched, as if the walls had pulled further away. The room had grown larger, cavernous, and yet closer, suffocating. The air hummed, a low vibration just beneath hearing, crawling across his skin like insects. And then whispers, faint at first, so faint he almost mistook them for the hiss of the extinguished burner. But they grew, a dozen threads weaving together, each one low and broken, overlapping in an impossible chorus. We'd found them. We found our eyes. Jake's chest tightened. He pressed his back against the wall, palms flat, as though he could keep the apartment from swallowing him whole. The whispers moved closer. No around him. They slithered along the ceiling, coiled through the floorboards, breathed against the nape of his neck. And now we need a new home. His pulse hammered. His legs buckled. He forced himself upright, staggering toward the hallway. The doorway stretched farther away with every step, the floor beneath him bending, bowing like he was walking on a thin sheet of ice ready to crack. The bulb above flickered, dimmed, then flared. Shadows rippled across the walls. For an instant, they weren't shadows at all, but figures tall, thin, faceless, their heads bent forward, eye sockets hollow. They watched him without watching, empty gazes fixed on the trembling man in the kitchen. No, Jake croaked, his throat raw. You're not real. You're not, the chorus answered, louder, sharper, rising into his bones. You're hollow already. You've been empty for so long. Let us fill you. Jake clamped his hands over his ears, but the voices burrowed through his palms, vibrating his skull, threading into his thoughts. He stumbled forward, tripping on the edge of the carpet, collapsing to his knees. His fingernails dug into the floor as if he could claw his way free. His gaze caught on the porridge pot. The surface bubbled lazily. Two pale orbs bobbed once more to the top. Not milky now, but clear, wet, fresh, shining with life. They blinked. Slowly, Jake's scream tore itself loose, ragged and hopeless. He staggered to his feet, lunging for the hallway. The walls seemed to bend inward, the ceiling slanting lower, pressing against him, funneling him toward the darkness at the end of the corridor. The whispers followed. Closer, louder. "We've found our eyes. And now we've found you." Jake stumbled into the living room, but it wasn't the same place anymore. The furniture stretched tall, warped. The couch loomed like a cliff face. The window was gone, replaced by a black expanse that breathed mist into the room. His apartment was no longer his own. It was becoming theirs. He pressed himself against the far wall, gasping, shaking, his vision blurring. His body begged him to collapse, but fear propped him up, brittle and sharp. The whispers hushed. Silence. Jake stood in the stillness, chest heaving, his ears strained, waiting, hoping the nightmare had ebbed. And then, close, so close the breath of it brushed the shell of his ear, came a single voice. Not a chorus, not a whisper of many, just one. Deep, hollow, certain. "Jake, it's time." Jake's lungs burned as he stumbled through the warped hallway. His bare feet slapped against the cold floor, but the floor didn't feel like wood anymore. It flexed and hummed beneath him, soft in places, as if he were running across something alive. He crashed into the living room, desperate to find the front door. His fingers clawed at the wall until they found the knob. Relief flared hot in his chest. He twisted, yanked. It didn't move. He pulled harder, his muscles screaming. The knob turned endlessly in his hand, spinning like a wheel, but the door never opened. The frame only shivered, breathing faintly, as though mocking his panic. Jake let out a ragged cry and staggered backward. That was when he saw them. Eyes, dozens of them, blooming into existence across the walls like fungi. Perfect, round, wet orbs pressed through the plaster, their whites gleaming, their pupils dilating as they adjusted to the light. They blinked in unison once, slowly fixing on him. Jake stumbled, his back hitting the couch. His breath tore from him in panic bursts. The room was alive with sight, the air charged with presence. He whipped his head toward the television. The screen flickered on with a hiss of static. His reflection stared back at him in grainy black and white, hollow-eyed, twitching. Then the reflection leaned forward, closer than he was standing, and more eyes bloomed across its face, spilling outward like a disease. Jake screamed and hurled the remote at the screen. Glass shattered, shards scattered across the floor like jagged teeth. But even in the broken surface, fragments of eyes glimmered, blinking from every shard. He spun toward the window. Maybe he could climb out. Maybe there was still a way. But the window had changed. The glass rippled, no longer transparent, no longer leading outside. Instead, it reflected the room, his room, but wrong. In the reflection, hundreds of eyes floated freely in the air, swimming like fish, darting toward the glass as though trying to push through. Jake staggered back, his foot caught on the rug, and he fell hard. The air knocked from his lungs. As he gasped, he felt its wetness against his palm. He lifted his hand. A smear of clear fluid clung to his skin, thick and gelatinous. It smelled faintly of salt, sharp and organic. Tears blurred his vision. He rubbed at his face, but the tears didn't feel like his own. They were too thick, too heavy. His fingertips came away slick, sticky with something that wasn't water. The whispers swelled, louder now, weaving around him in endless circles. "Don't fight, don't run. We only want to see again." Jake clambered to his feet, wild-eyed, staggering into the kitchen. His mind grasped at a single thought: the knife drawer. Something solid, something real. If he could just hold something sharp, something human, maybe he could ground himself. He yanked the drawer open. Metal clattered inside. He snatched the largest knife, gripping it so tightly his knuckles whitened. The kitchen answered him with silence. For a breath, he thought maybe the nightmare had broken. The eyes in the walls, the voices they had hushed. The only sound was his ragged breathing, the drip of a faucet somewhere. Then he noticed the reflection. The mirror above the sink no longer held his image. Instead, two enormous eyes pressed against the glass from the other side, unblinking, staring into him as though the mirror was nothing but a thin sheet of water. The surface bulged outward, the glass trembling. Jake staggered back, knife shaking in his grip. The whispers rose again, thundering now, many voices becoming one. "We see you, and soon, you will see as we do." The lights flickered. Every bulb in the apartment popped in sequence, plunging the rooms into darkness. For a moment, Jake thought he had gone blind. But then, slowly, new light bloomed. Not from lamps, not from bulbs, from the eyes. Hundreds of them, glowing faintly in the dark, embedded in walls, floors, ceilings surrounding him. Each one fixed on him, each one unblinking. Jake clutched the knife tighter, his scream caught between his teeth. He spun in circles, trapped, nowhere left to run. And in the silence between the whispers, he swore he heard something worse than words. Breathing, steady, close, right behind him. Jake's grip on the knife trembled, slick with sweat. His knuckles ached, white against the handle, as though the steel itself might anchor him to something sane. All around him, the eyes glowed faintly, hundreds of tiny lanterns breathing in the dark. Each one blinked slowly, their lids dragging, a chorus of wet sounds filling the silence. "Stay back," Jake shouted, his voice cracking. "Stay away from me." The eyes did not move. They only stared. Then the whispers began again. Louder, faster, not threads anymore, but ropes, weaving tight around his skull. "We see you. We see you. We see you." Jake clapped his free hand against his ear, but the voices pierced through bone. He stumbled toward the kitchen table, slashing wildly at the air. The blade cut nothing. Only the sound of his own panic filled the room. The whispers surged, overlapping, swelling into a shriek that rattled the cabinets and shook the floorboards. "We see you." The eyes pressed closer. He couldn't explain how, but the walls seemed to lean in, and with them the hundreds of glowing orbs. They pushed from plaster and wood, bulging outward, wet surfaces straining against the skin of the apartment. Some rolled forward, sliding down the walls like eggs dropped into water, leaving slick trails behind them. Jake swung the knife, connecting with one. It burst under the blade, not with blood, but with a gush of clear fluid that splashed across his chest, stinging his skin like acid. He gagged at the smell, salt and rot, metallic and sweet all at once. But for every eye he destroyed, two more opened. They sprouted in the ceiling, in the cracks of the floor, in the fabric of the couch, blinking, watching, closing in. Jake screamed, dropping the knife as the chorus rose higher, louder, until it was no longer whisper but thunder. 1,000 voices shrieking in perfect unison. "See as we do. See as we do." His vision blurred, his chest seized with panic. He fell to his knees, clutching his head, as the shriek drilled through his skull. The floor beneath him heaved like a living lung, rising and falling with the rhythm of the chant. The eyes moved now. They slid across the walls, rolled across the floor, blinking wetly as they advanced. They pressed against his legs, cold and gelatinous, climbing his skin like parasites. He tried to brush them away, but his hands passed through them as though they were made of smoke and salt water. Jake crawled backward, his spine hitting the counter. The eyes swarmed higher, climbing his chest, pressing into his arms, his throat. Their glow filled his vision, bleaching the world in pale, wet light. The chant became unbearable. "See as we do. See as we do." Jake's mouth opened in a scream, but no sound came out. His throat seized, as though the air itself refused to let him breathe. The pressure built in his skull, splitting, tearing. He clutched his face, fingers digging into his own skin, but the world tilted sideways. The eyes lifted from the floor now, hovering inches from his face. Dozens of them, hundreds. They pulsed with light, their pupils dilated, wide and hungry. Jake shook his head violently. "No, no, they're mine. These are my eyes." The voices roared back. One single sound, vast and absolute. Not anymore. The closest eye pushed forward, pressing cold and slick against his cheek. Another slid along his temple. Another hovered just before his left socket, trembling like a hand about to strike. Jake shrieked, thrashing, but the strength drained from his limbs. The glow blinded him. The chant filled him. His own scream was swallowed whole, folded into the chorus. until he no longer knew if the voice tearing through the room was his or theirs. And as the eyes pressed tighter, smothering, consuming, he felt the pull, not outward but inward, something dragging him down, into the sockets of his own reflection, into the abyss of their hunger. The world had dissolved into light and voices, until suddenly silence. Jake gasped, sucking in air as though he had surfaced from drowning. He staggered to his feet, chest heaving, eyes stinging. The glow had vanished. The whispers were gone. His apartment looked almost normal again. Almost. The mirror above the sink still glimmered faintly, drawing him in. He tried to look away, but his head turned to spite him. His gaze dragged toward it like iron to a magnet. His reflection stood there, staring back. But it wasn't right. The face was his, pale and drawn, mouth open in silent terror. But the eyes were gone. Only two black cavities remained, deep and endless, swallowing the weak light of the room. The hollows leaked shadows, thin trails of smoke curling outward like breath. Jake stumbled closer, unable to stop himself. His palms pressed against the counter, cold laminate grounding him for only a heartbeat. He leaned toward the mirror, breath fogging the glass, staring into the pits where his own eyes should have been, and then the reflection smiled. Not wide, not grotesque, but enough a curve of lips that his own face did not make. Jake reeled back, his spine colliding with the refrigerator, his vision blurred. He clawed at his own face, desperate to feel his eyes still there, to prove they hadn't been stolen. Fingertips pressed against lids. Relief surged until it didn't, because beneath his touch, his eyes felt wrong, too soft, too shallow. He opened them wider, heart pounding, and the kitchen swam. The outlines of furniture bled at the edges. The shadows quivered unnaturally. Then he felt it, a weight settling against his right socket. Cold, round, wet. It pressed gently, insistently, until his skull seemed to accept it. He tried to jerk away, but his body wouldn't move. His mouth opened in a scream that refused to escape. Another weight slid into place in his left socket. Colder, heavier. Darkness closed over him, not from the absence of light, but from being filled with something else, something that pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat not his own. And in that black silence, he heard the voice again, closer now, inside his head, inside the cold orbs that had become his eyes. "You see for us now." Jake's breath hitched, his body shuddered, and then, from just beyond the edge of the mirror, he felt a hand clammy, unfamiliar slide across his shoulder. The whisper pressed against his ear, soft as a kiss, final as a grave. "We're right here." Story 4. The Strays in the Forest. The forest at night was never silent. It breathed in layers, wind sighing through pines, branches clicking together like bones, insects buzzing in the dark. But as Mike and Josh pushed deeper into the trees, the rhythm of the woods seemed wrong, broken, as if the usual night song had been replaced by something watching, waiting. Their flashlights carved narrow tunnels of light through the undergrowth. Beyond the beams, everything blurred into thick shadows. "You're sure this is the trail?" Josh muttered, his voice thin, half swallowed by the trees. Mike raised his light higher, squinting at the faint dirt path beneath their boots. "It wasn't on the map, but it has to lead somewhere. Better than going in circles." Josh grunted but said nothing more. The boys had been walking for hours. Their packs hung heavy on their shoulders, straps digging into skin damp with sweat. The plan had been simple: hike out, camp overnight, head back by morning. But the woods hadn't followed their plan. The familiar trail had vanished behind them, paths doubling back in ways that made no sense. Now, the only choice was forward. The deeper they went, the stranger it felt. The air thickened, damp and cool. A smell hung there, earthy, almost metallic, like wet soil mixed with rust. Josh sniffed the air, wrinkling his nose. "Smells like something died out here." Mike forced a laugh, though it came out hollow. "Probably just swamp gas. Or what do they call it, ironwood? Trees can stink too." Neither of them believed it. The trail curved, winding between ancient trees whose trunks were so wide they seemed older than memory. Their bark shone pale under the flashlight beams, almost white, as though drained of color. Moss clung thick to their roots, drinking in what little moonlight slipped through the canopy. Josh stopped suddenly. "Do you hear that?" Mike froze. For a moment he thought Josh meant the rustle of leaves, the scrape of branches, but then he realized there was nothing. No insects, no wind, no sound of the night at all. The silence pressed against them, heavy and absolute. Mike's throat went dry. Maybe it's just the weather. Josh shook his head. His grip tightened on the flashlight. Feels wrong. They pressed on, their footsteps crunching too loud on the brittle leaves. Every snap of a twig sounded like a crack of thunder. The silence made them hyper-aware of their own breathing, of their pounding hearts, of the way their shadows trembled at their heels. The trail widened suddenly, opening into a clearing. At its center stood a tree larger than the rest, its branches clawing upward like skeletal arms. The trunk twisted unnaturally, pale and smooth, as though polished by countless hands, and beneath it, a figure. Mike's light caught the edge first, illuminating a thin shape standing motionless at the base of the tree. A girl, long white hair spilled down her back, gleaming under the moonlight. Her dress clung pale to her frame, unmoving, as though the night itself refused to touch her. Josh sucked in a sharp breath. Who is that? Mike's voice shook. Maybe she's lost too. But as the light climbed higher, sweeping across her face, the words turned to dust. There was no face, only smooth, blank skin, pale and featureless, where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. Mike's hand slipped on the flashlight. The beam wavered. His breath hitched, loud in the crushing silence. The girl's head tilted. Not far, just enough. The kind of tilt that suggested listening, or noticing, or smiling without a mouth. Josh grabbed Mike's arm, his whisper ragged. Run. And they did. Branches whipped against their arms and legs as they sprinted back toward the trail, flashlights jerking wildly. Behind them, the silence shattered. Leaves crunched. Soil tore. Josh risked a glance over his shoulder. The faceless girl was following, but she was no longer standing upright. Her arms and legs bent backwards, joints cracking as she scuttled on all fours, faster than anything human should move, pale hair streaming like a ghost's banner as she closed the distance. Josh's scream split the night, and Mike didn't dare look back again. The forest tore at them as they ran. Branches whipped across their arms and faces, brambles clawed their legs, roots threatened to trip them with every desperate stride. Their flashlights swung wildly, beams jerking through the dark, carving pale streaks across the endless trees. Mike's lungs burned. Each breath was ragged, torn from his chest, but he didn't dare stop. Josh's footfalls thudded just behind him, frantic, uneven, each step betraying panic. And behind them, something else. Not steady footsteps, not the rhythm of human legs, but a scatter of limbs striking the ground in unnatural bursts, fast and jarring, like bone against wood. The sound skittered through the night, sometimes close, sometimes far, but always following. Mike, Josh's voice cracked. She's not stopping. Mike risked a glance over his shoulder. The faceless girl scuttled on all fours, pale hair flying, her movements insect-like, too quick, too sharp. Her body bent wrong, back arched, limbs crooked, each joint snapping into impossible angles as she gained ground. Faster, Mike barked, his own voice hoarse with terror. They crashed through underbrush, branches slapping at their shoulders, but no matter how far they ran, the sound followed, the scrape of hands digging into soil, the thud of feet hitting roots, the hiss of breath from a throat that had no mouth. The trail they had followed was gone. In the chaos, they had strayed into unmarked forest, trees closing in tighter, canopy blotting out what little moonlight seeped through. Their flashlights became lifelines, thin beams against a sea of black. Where are we going? Josh panted. I don't know. Mike snapped, panic rising like bile. Just away. But away didn't exist. Every direction looked the same, twisting trunks, damp earth, shadows bending into shapes that felt too deliberate. The forest itself seemed to lead them in circles, funneling them back toward something unseen. A sound split the air, not the scatter of limbs this time. A laugh. It wasn't human. It wasn't even sound. Exactly. It was a vibration that prickled in their ears, high-pitched and hollow, like the echo of children's laughter distorted through broken glass. Josh stumbled, nearly falling. Mike, did you hear that? Mike's breath hitched. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both knew. The laugh came again, closer. They veered right, crashing through a thicket. Thorns tore at their clothes, ripped at their skin, but fear drove them through. Mike's flashlight beam caught something ahead, a gap between trees. Maybe a path, maybe salvation. But as they pushed through, the gap led only deeper, darker. The trees seemed taller here, their branches knitting into a ceiling that blocked all light. The air thickened, damp and suffocating, heavy with a smell like rot and stagnant water. Josh's voice cracked. "We're lost. We're not getting out." "Don't say that," Mike snapped, though his own throat trembled. A branch snapped behind them. They froze. Mike turned slowly, flashlight beam shaking. The girl stood at the edge of the thicket they had just forced through. Her faceless head tilted again, pale hair falling in curtains around smooth skin. She crouched low, hands pressed against the soil, her limbs twitching in short, jerking bursts. Her body trembled as though straining against some invisible thread. Then she lunged. Mike shoved Josh hard. "Run." They bolted, their screams tearing through the forest. The girl's limbs hammered the ground, faster than their pounding feet, closing the distance with horrifying speed. Josh risked another look back. His scream split the night. She's climbing the trees." Mike looked. It was true. Her body twisted upward, scuttling up the side of a pine, fingers clawing into bark. She moved like a spider, skittering into the branches above. For a heartbeat, she vanished into the canopy. Mike slowed, breath ragged. "Where is she?" Then the sound of limbs exploded above them. Branches cracked, leaves rained down, and from the dark canopy she dropped. Her body hit the ground only feet away, landing on all fours, head snapping upward, featureless face locked in their direction. Josh's flashlight flickered, his breath hitched into a sob. "She's playing with us." Mike grabbed his arm, yanking him forward. "Don't look, just move." But as they plunged deeper, no matter how far they ran, the forest seemed to fold back into her shape. Every path, every shadow, every sound bent toward her. They weren't running away anymore. They were being herded. The forest swallowed their screams. Mike's lungs burned as he ran, his flashlight beam jittering across endless trunks, the world collapsing into shadows and breathless panic. Behind him, Josh's footfalls pounded, desperate, uneven. The sound of pursuit skittered between them, a scatter of limbs on bark, the scrape of nails through soil. She's right on us," Josh cried, his voice breaking. Mike didn't answer. He couldn't. His chest was too tight, his throat too raw. Every nerve in his body screamed for speed, for escape, though the forest twisted endlessly around them. Then it happened. A low root snagged Josh's boot. His body pitched forward, flashlight tumbling from his hand, clattering against the dirt. The beam rolled wild, spilling light across the trees. Josh hit the ground hard, breath punched from his chest. Mike skidded to a halt. "Josh!" End quote. Josh scrambled to his knees, gasping, reaching for the fallen light. The shadows leapt, swayed, and in that moment, both of them saw her. The faceless girl crouched only a dozen paces away. Pale hair hung like a shroud, her body bent backward, limbs arched too far, her featureless head tilted toward them. "Go!" Josh screamed, his voice raw. "Don't wait, just go." Mike shook his head violently. "I'm not leaving you." But Josh shoved at him, frantic, desperate. "Run." So Mike's heart split in his chest. Instinct took over. Terror seized his legs, yanking him forward. He sprinted into the trees, sobs breaking in his throat, the forest tearing at him. Behind, Josh's light flickered once, twice, then darkness swallowed it whole. The woods were silent for a breath. Then came a sound Mike would never forget, a scream. It was Josh's voice, but broken, shredded into something unrecognizable. The scream twisted higher, cracking into laughter hollow, distorted before cutting off entirely. Mike's body shook as he ran. Hot tears blurred his vision, his breath coming in ragged sobs. The thought tore at him, relentless. He's gone. He's gone. And I left him. But he couldn't stop. The forest bent around him, the trail splitting, twisting. Branches clawed at his jacket, thorns ripped at his skin. He stumbled into a small clearing, collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. For a moment, There was only silence, then footsteps. Slow, careful, deliberate. Mike jerked his head up, flashlight beam slicing across the clearing. His chest tightened. Josh stood there, on the far side of the clearing, beneath the tangled limbs of a dying tree. Josh's figure emerged. His body was rigid, his arms hanging loose at his sides. His clothes were torn, smeared with mud. "Josh," Mike's voice cracked, breaking into relief and horror all at once. "Oh my God, you made it." "Ew." Josh didn't answer. He only lifted his head slowly, and where his face should have been, nothing. Smooth, pale skin stretched over hollow bone. A blank void. Mike staggered backward, his scream catching in his throat. His flashlight beam trembled, spilling across the clearing, catching the faint shimmer of wetness on Josh's faceless head, as though it had only just been wiped clean. Behind him, something shifted. Leaves rustled. Mike spun, chest heaving. The girl was there, crawling low, limbs twisted, hair dragging through the dirt. Her faceless head turned toward him, then toward Josh, as though admiring her work. Two of them now. The clearing shrank around Mike, his light flickering. His body trembled, breath tearing ragged from his chest. He stumbled back until his heels dug into the soft earth, and he realized, with ice in his veins, he was surrounded. Mike's flashlight beam wavered across the clearing, slicing through fog that had crept low to the ground. His chest heaved, lungs raw, but he forced himself upright. Every muscle screamed to flee, but there was nowhere left to run. The faceless girl crouched at the edge of the trees, her limbs bent wrong, her head cocked at that dreadful angle. Beside her, the figure that wore Josh's body stood still, blank face gleaming pale in the beam. Mike stumbled backward, step by step, until his boots sank into softer soil. The ground squelched beneath him, damp and spongy. He swung the light downward mud, black and slick, spreading wider with every step. A swamp. The earth had given way to a shallow basin, its surface gleaming with stagnant water. Tendrils of mist curled upward from it, curling like fingers, reaching. Mike's heart pounded in his ears. He spun the light across the far side of the mire, and froze. Josh stood there. Not the faceless figure, not the warped imitation, but Josh as he remembered him, wide-eyed, pale, his chest heaving with exhaustion. He lifted one hand, beckoning. "Mike," his voice carried, ragged but familiar. "This way, hurry." Tears stung Mike's eyes. His throat tightened. Relief surged, but tangled with terror. "Josh, is it really? Come on." Josh waved more urgently, his voice cracking. "We don't have time." Behind Mike, branches cracked. He turned, the beam catching the faceless girl as she crawled into the clearing. Her hair dragged through mud, pale strands slick with filth. Each limb bent grotesquely as she moved closer, faster, closing the distance with spider-like precision. Mike stumbled forward, toward the swamp's edge. The ground sucked at his boots, pulling him down with each step. Panic clawed at his chest. He glanced back. She was closer, much closer. Her featureless head tilted, hair dangling forward, as if scenting his fear. "Mike!" Josh shouted again, hand outstretched. His eyes looked so real, his face flushed with desperation. "Trust me." Mike's flashlight flickered. The beam sputtered, then steadied, painting the clearing in harsh, shaking light. For an instant, just one, Josh's face blurred. His eyes vanished. His mouth disappeared. Smooth skin gleamed where his features should have been. Mike's scream caught in his throat. The light wavered, and suddenly the face was normal again. Eyes wide, mouth shouting his name. Behind, the girl's limbs scraped against the ground, pulling her closer with inhuman speed. The sound of her joints cracking echoed in the clearing, a grotesque percussion that filled Mike's ears. The swamp bubbled faintly at his feet, releasing the smell of decay. The water churned as if alive, as if waiting. Josh's voice rang out once more, urgent, desperate. "Mike, don't stop, come to me." Mike's body shook violently. His legs moved on their own, dragging him closer to the swamp's edge, toward the hand outstretched on the far side. His chest heaved, mind splintering between terror and the faint, impossible hope that maybe, just maybe, it really was Josh. Behind him, the faceless girl lunged, hair whipping forward as her body contorted in a final, grotesque sprint. And ahead of him, Josh's pale hand reached farther across the dark water, beckoning, inviting. The mire rippled, black and endless, as though waiting for his final step. The mud sucked at Mike's boots as he staggered forward, the swamp breathing beneath him like something alive. Each step drew him deeper, pulling him down inch by inch, but he couldn't stop. His eyes clung to the figure on the far side, the boy he knew, the friend he had left behind. Josh stood in the mist, arms stretched out, palm open, waiting. His lips moved, shaping Mike's name over and over, though the words came muffled, warped by the fog. Mike, Mike, come on. The sound tugged at him, pulled him. Mike's legs sank to the ankles, then to the shins, the mud clinging like hands. His flashlight beam trembled across the clearing, catching Josh's face in brief flashes, and then the light steadied. Mike froze. Josh's features blurred, shimmered. His eyes winked out, his mouth folded into skin, smooth, blank, a mask of nothing. The hand still reached, fingers splayed wide, eager. Mike's scream split the clearing. He tried to wrench himself backward, but the swamp pulled tighter, up to his knees now, sucking, gurgling, swallowing him whole. "Help me," he cried, voice ragged, torn from his chest. "Please, Josh." No. The thing wearing Josh's body lurched forward, stepping onto the water without sinking. His hand clamped down around Mike's wrist, cold and strong. Mike's bones screamed under the pressure. The grip wasn't saving him, it was dragging him deeper. The faceless girl crouched at the edge of the swamp, her body twitching, head tilted as if savoring the scene. Her pale hair spread across the mud like roots, drinking in his despair. Mike's chest heaved, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the mist. No, I don't want. The mud surged higher, swallowing his waist, his chest. His body convulsed as the swamp wrapped around him, clinging not like water but like flesh. It was warm now, alive. He looked down and saw his own hands sinking into the muck, the skin bubbling, softening, turning dark. His fingers lost their shape, melting into sludge. His arms followed, the flesh dripping away as though his body were being rewritten. "No," Mike screamed, though the sound was already fading, swallowed by the mire. "I'm still." The swamp claimed his chest, his shoulders. His flashlight slipped from his grip, vanishing into black water. And then the cold spread to his face. He gasped once more, desperate, and in that breath he felt the mud fill his mouth, his nose, pressing into his skull. His eyes burned, then burst into darkness. The last thing he saw was Josh's faceless head looming above him, bent in mockery of compassion, whispering without lips. "Stay." The swamp closed over him, and Mike felt himself dissolve, bone and blood giving way to mud, until nothing of him remained but the slow ripple of the mire, as if it had been waiting all along. Story 5. The Midnight Shadows. The dorm always felt different after midnight. The hum of voices in the hall died away, footsteps faded, and only the low drone of the vending machine down the corridor broke the silence. Nick had grown used to it, living with 3 other guys in a cramped room. That noise was constant, but nights like this carried a strange weight. It was late, later than any of them meant to stay up, but none of them cared. The 4 of them sat clustered around the flickering light of the television, controllers in hand, eyes glazed with exhaustion. Mark cursed as his character died on screen. "Cheap shot," he muttered, tossing the controller down with a groan. Sam laughed, nudging him. "You always say that when you lose." James leaned back against his pillow, stretching, the dim glow from the TV catching the bags under his eyes. "One more round, then I'm done. I've got class at 8. Nick smirked, tightening his grip on his controller. "Yeah, one more round, then we'll see who's actually trash." They laughed, the kind of easy, late-night laughter that came only when sleep was already slipping too far away. But Nick couldn't shake the odd feeling gnawing at the edge of his mind. Maybe it was the silence outside their door, or the way the shadows in the corners of the room seemed thicker tonight. He shook it off, focusing on the screen, telling himself it was nothing. The match ended. Mark yawned, tossing his blanket over his lap. "All right, I need a break. Bathroom." He stood, stretching, and slipped out the door, leaving it cracked open behind him. The others barely noticed. They started another round, their eyes fixed to the screen. Minutes passed. The sound of gunfire and explosions from the game filled the room, covering the faint noises outside. Nick only realized how much time had gone by when the door creaked open again. Mark stepped inside. But something was wrong. He didn't speak, didn't laugh, didn't complain about losing. He just stepped into the room slowly, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. Then he stood in the far corner, back slightly hunched, head bowed low, his face hidden in shadow. Nick frowned. "Hey, you good?" No response. Sam glanced over briefly, then turned back to the game. Ignore him, probably sulking, but Nick couldn't ignore it. A chill slid down his spine as he watched Mark's stillness. He wasn't sulking. He wasn't even breathing, not that Nick could see. His chest didn't move. He just stood there, silent, face shrouded. Nick's grip tightened on the controller. He wanted to say something more, but the words stuck. The room felt heavier now, the air thicker. Then Sam groaned, dropping his controller. "All right, my turn for the bathroom." Nick opened his mouth to warn him, to tell him not to go, but nothing came out. He watched helplessly as Sam slipped through the door, the hall light spilling in for a moment before it clicked shut again. The room returned to shadows and flickering TV light. Mark still stood in the corner, head bowed, unmoving. Nick's stomach knotted. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. And when the door opened again, Sam stepped back inside. He didn't speak either. He walked slowly to the corner, joining Mark. He stood the same way, head bowed, body slack, shadow covering his face. Two figures now, silent, motionless. Nick's blood ran cold. Nick's hands clenched the controller, but he had stopped playing. His eyes kept flicking to the corner of the room where Mark and Sam stood side by side. Their heads bowed, their bodies slack like marionettes waiting for strings. The TV's glow painted them in shifting light blue, then red, then white as the game cycled through explosions and gunfire. Their faces, or what should have been faces, were swallowed by shadow. James leaned forward on the bed, still focused on the screen. "You're losing it, man," he laughed, flicking Nick a glance. "Don't choke now." Nick didn't answer. His throat was too dry. He wanted to speak, wanted to point out the strangeness, but the words wouldn't come. His chest felt heavy, the air thick like smoke. Every breath came shallow, his ribs tight. James didn't notice. He cursed under his breath as his character took a hit, then threw his head back with a groan. "Damn it. Okay, one more round. But this is the last one. Seriously." Nick's grip slackened. The controller slid from his hands, landing on the carpet with a soft thud. James didn't even look up. Nick's gaze locked on the corner. Mark shifted, just slightly. His foot scraped against the floor, a slow drag, as though testing the weight of his own body. Sam followed, tilting his head lower, the shadows sliding deeper across him. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them breathed. Nick's pulse hammered. He wiped his palms against his jeans, fighting the urge to run. But where could he go? Past them? Into the hall where the silence stretched too deep? James finally noticed the controller at Nick's feet. "What's up with you?" He laughed, shaking his head. "Tired already? You look like you've seen a ghost." Nick swallowed hard. His voice came out a whisper, thin and broken. "James, look at them." James glanced toward the corner, his brows furrowed. "What about them? They're just screwing with you." "No." Nick shook his head violently, his breath catching. "No, they're not." But James only smirked, leaning back against the pillow again. "Relax, dude. You've been up too long. You're just paranoid." Nick stared harder. His gut screamed otherwise. Every nerve in his body recoiled at the sight of his friend standing there, heads bowed, silent, unmoving. The room felt wrong, heavy. The TV flickered, casting sharp shadows across the walls. For a moment, just a moment, Nick thought he saw their bodies stretch taller in the flash, limbs elongated, shadows reaching higher than they should. Then the screen shifted back, and they looked normal again. But the dread clung. Nick's breath hitched. His hands trembled in his lap. He wanted to shake James, to force him to see. But before he could move, Mark's head twitched. A quick, sharp jerk to the side. Sam followed, bowing lower, their shadows stretching across the wall like stains. James didn't notice. His eyes were glued to the game. Nick pressed his back against the bed frame, his chest tight, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down from above. Something was wrong. Terribly, horribly wrong. And he was the only one who felt it. James tossed his controller onto the bed with a groan. All right, that's it. I'm done. Bathroom, then I'm crashing. Nick's stomach dropped. His hand shot out instinctively. Wait. James paused, half smiling. What, you need me to hold your hand or something? Nick opened his mouth, but no words came. How could he explain that their friends were standing like broken mannequins in the corner, heads bowed, unmoving, that the room felt like it was collapsing under a weight only he could feel? James shook his head. You're jumpy tonight. He pushed himself off the bed, stretching as he made for the door. 2 minutes. Don't freak out. The door clicked shut, and Nick was alone. The silence fell instantly, thick as a shroud. The only sound was the faint hum of the television and his own ragged breathing. He turned his gaze toward the corner. Mark and Sam still stood there, heads bowed, hands limp at their sides. Shadows clung to their forms as if the darkness had grown hungry for them. Nick's chest ached. His body screamed at him to leave, to bolt out into the hall, but his legs refused. He was anchored to the bed, paralyzed by dread. Then came the sound. A shuffle, slow, deliberate, not from the corner, from the middle of the room. Nick's eyes darted forward. Something was forming there. The shadows thickened, pooling into the center of the dorm like liquid night, rising higher, stretching taller. The television's flicker only made it worse. Each flash of light revealed edges, outlines, limbs that weren't fully human. Nick's breath caught. His body went rigid as 3 shapes emerged, standing side by side. They were taller than men. Their heads brushed the ceiling. Their bodies were narrow, elongated, twisting unnaturally, as though struggling to fit into the space. No faces, only hollows. No mouths, yet the air throbbed with the promise of whispers. Nick squeezed his eyes shut, his heart hammering. Don't look, don't look. But curiosity clawed at him. Slowly, painfully, he cracked his lids open. The shadows had shifted closer. They no longer stood at the center of the room, but nearer, looming between him and the corner, where Mark and Sam remained frozen. Nick whimpered, the sound catching in his throat. The figures didn't move like people. They bent in jerks, heads lolling, shoulders twitching, as though learning how to inhabit bodies that weren't theirs. Each time the TV light flickered, he caught glimpses of long arms dragging against the floor, stretching too far, too thin. The air pressed colder. Nick felt it against his skin, sinking into his bones. He wrapped his arms around himself, rocking slightly, as if it might shield him. His eyes darted toward the door, but the door was darker now, not just shut-sealed. The shadows had thickened across it, swallowing the frame until it looked painted into the wall. Nick's pulse roared in his ears. He wanted to scream for James, to beg him to come back, but what if James didn't come back alone? What if he never came back at all? The tallest shadow bent forward, its faceless head lowering toward him. The outline of its shape shimmered faintly, as though it wasn't just shadow, but something wearing the shadow like skin. Nick froze, breath shallow, every muscle straining against the weight of terror. And then, footsteps echoed in the hall. James. Nick's heart lurched. Relief and dread tangled in his chest, because if James walked back through that door now, he wouldn't be walking in alone. The handle rattled. Nick's stomach clenched as the door creaked open. Light from the hallway spilled in for a heartbeat before vanishing again as James stepped inside. Man, you look like hell, James said with a tired laugh. What's with the face? But Nick couldn't answer, because Mark and Sam were still in the corner silent, heads bowed. And yet James was here, brushing his hands dry on his pajama pants, closing the door as if nothing were wrong. 3 of them. Nick's voice cracked. James. James frowned, tilting his head. What? Nick raised a trembling hand toward the corner. You're already here. The words hung heavy in the room. James followed Nick's pointing finger. His shoulders stiffened. The smirk fell from his face. For a moment the room was silent but for the hum of the TV. Then Mark moved. His head lifted slowly, too slowly, until the shadow slipped from his face. Nick's stomach turned. There were no eyes, no mouth, no nose, only smooth skin stretched across bone, gleaming faintly under the flickering light. Beside him, Sam lifted his head as well, identical, blank, voiceless. James stumbled back, his breath hitching. What the hell? The figures in the middle of the room shifted. The three shadows loomed taller now, their heads bending low to graze the ceiling. Their bodies bent and straightened, a grotesque rhythm like breathing. Nick's chest heaved. He grabbed James's arm. They're not them. They're not. But James's face froze mid-expression. His jaw slackened. His eyes dulled, then darkened. The edges of his skin blurred in the low light, as if shadow was seeping into his pores, hollowing him out from within. Nick staggered back. No, not you two. James's head bowed, slowly, and when he lifted it again, his features were gone. Three faceless bodies in the corner, three shadows in the middle of the room. Nick's scream split the silence. Raw and helpless, he pressed himself against the bed frame, clutching at the sheets, desperate for anything solid, anything real. The shadows moved closer, not walking, not crawling, but gliding. Their elongated limbs dragged against the floor with a hiss, their forms bending into impossible shapes, pressing in on him. The air thickened, damp and suffocating. Nick's lungs refused to fill. From all around, a whisper rose low at first, then louder, threading through every corner of the dorm. He's still here. He's still here. The tallest shadow bent low, its faceless head nearly touching Nick's. The smell of damp earth and dust filled his nostrils. Nick's hands shook violently, his body rigid, his mind screaming at him to shut his eyes. But he couldn't, because the moment he blinked, the darkness moved closer still, swallowing the last light in the room. Nick's body locked in place, his breath a shallow rasp. The room was filled with them, shadows bending, faceless heads tilting toward him. Mark, Sam, James all standing slack in the corners like empty shells. Then the television flickered. For a single heartbeat, the screen flashed white, bleaching the dorm in harsh light, and they were gone. The corner was empty, the center of the room bare, the air stilled. Nick blinked hard, his pulse pounding in his throat. No, they were right here. His voice cracked against the silence. The bed beside him was rumpled, controllers scattered, proof of the game they'd been playing only minutes ago. But the room was empty now. No Mark, no Sam, no James, just him. The silence pressed tighter, suffocating. The air grew heavy, cold seeping into his skin. And then, faint at first, like the rustle of leaves, came the whisper. He's still here. Nick's stomach knotted. The whisper wasn't outside. It wasn't in his head. It came from the room itself, from the walls, the ceiling, the floor. The words multiplied, layering over each other, echoing until the dorm seemed to breathe with them. He's still here. He's still here. He's still here. Nick clapped his hands over his ears, shaking his head violently. Stop. His voice broke into sobs. The whispers hushed. For a moment, the room held its breath. Then another whisper came. Clearer. Closer. He's outside. Nick froze. The words slithered through his chest, tightening his lungs. His eyes darted to the door. The frame looked darker now, its edges pulsing faintly, as though something stood just beyond it. The silence shattered. 3 sharp knocks rattled the wood. Nick jumped, his breath tearing free in a strangled cry. The knocks came again, and then James's voice. Soft, familiar, broken by static, like a voice carried over a radio that shouldn't work. Nick's skin crawled. His body refused to move. Nick, the voice repeated, almost pleading now. Can you see me? The door handle twitched, and the whispers, all around him, rose again, gleeful this time, cold and hungry. Open the door, open the door, open the door. Nick's scream stuck in his throat as the knocks grew louder, faster, shaking the frame, rattling the hinges. And then silence. Only his own ragged breathing remained, until the last whisper slid against his ear, close as breath. He's already inside. Story 6. The Winter Morgue. The morgue was colder than usual that night. Daniel had worked late shifts before, but winter was different. The chill sank deeper, biting through the fluorescent light and steel tables, wrapping the air in something that felt more permanent than temperature. It was the kind of cold that made the walls sweat, the kind that whispered you weren't alone even when you were. He pulled his coat tighter around his scrubs, adjusting the lamp above the workbench. His breath fogged faintly, drifting up and vanishing in the harsh light. Somewhere down the hall, a ventilation fan groaned against ice. The body had arrived just after midnight, unclaimed, no ID. No next of kin, a Jane or John Doe, depending on what he found. The gurney wheels squeaked as the orderlies pushed it in, their faces pale, tired. They hadn't lingered. Few ever did. Now it was just him and the body. Daniel ran a hand across the clipboard, his eyes scanning the intake notes. Male, estimated late 20s, found collapsed near the riverbank. No wallet, no phone, no personal effects. Signs of exposure, but nothing conclusive. He set the clipboard aside and tugged on his gloves, the latex snapping against his wrists. The sound echoed too loudly in the empty room, bouncing off steel drawers and tile walls. For a long moment, he simply stood there, staring at the sheet-draped form. He had done this countless times. Bodies didn't scare him, not anymore. It was the silence that did. The stillness of the morgue, the hum of fluorescent lights, the endless weight of night pressing against the windows. He reached for the sheet. The fabric rasped as it folded back, revealing pale skin beneath, stiff with cold. The man's chest was bare, ribs visible, skin stretched too thin, as if the flesh had been pressed down from within. His lips were parted, frozen mid-breath. Frost had kissed the edges of his hair, glimmering faintly under the lamp. Daniel leaned closer, his breath steady, his pen scratching across the clipboard. Male, Caucasian, estimated age 27 to 30, height 6'2", signs of hypothermia, consistent with exposure, possible drowning. His voice was quiet, more for himself than anyone else. The silence demanded it. The body's eyes were closed. For that, Daniel was grateful. He always hated it when they came in with eyes wide open, glassy stares that caught the light like mirrors. He checked the hand's next, long fingers curled inward, nails cracked and blackened. On the left wrist was a faint mark, circular, as if a band or chain had rubbed against it. Daniel frowned, scribbling the detail down. He moved to the chest, tracing the outline of faint bruises. The skin was mottled, bluish in places. His pen scratched louder against the paper than it should have, the sound echoing like something alive. The room seemed to grow colder. Daniel glanced at the wall thermometer. The red line had dipped again, though the heat was running. He rubbed his arms, returning to the work. He leaned in, preparing for the Y incision. The scalpel gleamed under the lamp. He steadied his hand. Then, the chest rose, only slightly. The barest tremor. Daniel froze, the scalpel hovering inches from skin. His breath stopped in his throat. For a moment he told himself it was nothing. Reflex, nerves, a trick of the eye. Bodies twitched, muscles fired post-mortem. He had seen it before, but then it happened again. The chest rose, fell, rose, a rhythm, breath. Daniel stumbled back, the scalpel clattering to the tile. His heart pounded, each beat a hammer against his ribs. He stared at the corpse, eyes wide, throat tight, waiting for the silence to break. And it did. The man's eyes opened, not slowly, not with the half-lidded flutter of reflex. They snapped wide, irises pale and glassy, locking onto Daniel's face. For the first time that night, the cold felt like it had teeth. The eyes did not blink. Daniel's breath came shallow, his body trembling as he stared back at the corpse. Pale, glassy irises locked onto him, unblinking, unyielding. He waited for them to close again, to slip back into stillness. But they did not. Then the chest rose higher, and the man sat up. The sound was worse than the sight joints grinding, stiff muscles tearing against themselves as the body forced upright. The gurney creaked under the weight, metal legs rattling against tile. Daniel stumbled backward, crashing into the instrument tray. Scalpels, forceps, syringes scattered across the floor in a metallic rain. His throat burned with a scream he couldn't release. His mind raced. Post-mortem reflex, Lazarus sign, electrical impulses, residual nerves firing. He clung to the words like lifelines, repeating them in his head. This isn't real. This isn't alive. It's just biology. But biology didn't explain the way the corpse turned its head. Slowly, deliberately, the neck cracked, vertebrae straining, until the glassy eyes were fixed on him again. Daniel pressed himself against the wall, palms slick inside his gloves. His breath fogged in front of him, ragged, uneven. He forced his voice out, thin and shaking. It's just nerves. You're not. The corpse inhaled, not a spasm, not a twitch, a drawn-out breath that rattled through dead lungs, filling the morgue with the sound of something that should not breathe. Daniel's knees weakened. He gripped the counter to steady himself, bile rising in his throat. Then, from those parted lips, a sound emerged. At first, only a rasp, like wind through a broken window. Then the rasp shaped itself into syllables. Words. You. See me. Daniel's stomach turned to stone. His jaw clenched as the words hung in the cold air, thin but deliberate. The body's lips quivered. Again the voice came hollow, wet, torn from a throat that should have been dust. You see me. Daniel shook his head violently. No. No, you're dead. You're not speaking. This is impossible. The corpse leaned forward, the sheet sliding from its shoulders. Its skin was mottled blue, chest streaked with frost, but its movements were steady now. It spoke again, clearer. I was not finished. Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs. His thoughts scrambled for answers. Any explanation that fit into medicine, into reason. He had studied cadavers, learned every stage of decay, cataloged every spasm and twitch a dead body could make. But nothing accounted for this, and yet it was happening. The corpse's gaze never left him. Its glassy eyes gleamed faintly under the lamp, wet and unbroken, as if they had never belonged to death at all. Daniel whispered hoarsely, his voice shaking. What do you want? The body inhaled again, the sound sharp, dragging, as though each breath scraped the air itself. Then it spoke. I want what was taken. The morgue lights flickered. The thermometer needle dipped lower. Daniel's skin crawled with cold as the body leaned closer, words spilling now with dreadful clarity. And you will help me find it. The corpse sat rigid on the gurney, frost still clinging to its hair. Its voice scratched the air like rusted metal dragged across stone. I remember. Daniel flinched at the sound. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, but his training betrayed him. He reached for the clipboard instead, pen trembling in his grip. Some part of his mind clung to the ritual of notes, as though documenting would make the moment less real. The body's head tilted, its eyes clouded, lifeless, yet fixed remained on him. I was walking. Night. Cold. Too cold. The voice faltered, scraping through syllables, then steadied. The river froze at the edges. The wind bit through my coat. I knew I should not be there. Daniel swallowed, his pen scratching across paper in jagged strokes. Subject vocalizing. Memory recall? His hand shook so badly the letters blurred. The corpse's lips parted again, and steam, faint and gray, leaked out with each word. They were waiting. Not men, not fully. They wanted what I carried. Not money, not blood, something deeper. Daniel's mouth dried. He forced himself to ask, though his voice cracked in the stillness. What did they take? The corpse lifted a hand, joints groaning, fingers curling in on themselves. The nails scraped against the steel gurney. Its head turned slightly, as if listening to something only it could hear. They reached inside. The words hung heavy. Not skin, not bone. Deeper. They pulled it from me while I screamed. And when it was gone, the voice faltered, then dropped to a whisper. I was empty. Daniel's pen stilled. His mind strained for sense, for logic, but the weight in the words left no room for rationality. He pressed the pen harder to paper, desperate to tether himself to the familiar. Subject claims soul removal, metaphorical, hallucination, but even as he wrote, he knew these weren't the notes of a professional. They were confessions of a man trying to convince himself he wasn't losing his mind. The corpse leaned forward, its head jerking with effort, voice rougher now. They took what made me human, what bound me here. And now, I wander, cold, waiting. Daniel's chest tightened, his breath quickened. He heard his own thoughts as though they weren't his. You're listening. You're engaging. You're feeding it. Still, he whispered, what do you want from me? The corpse's eyes gleamed faintly under the lamp, glass catching the fluorescent hum. You are the first who hears, the first who stays. Its mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile if flesh hadn't been so stiff. You must return it, or give me another. Daniel's stomach lurched. His knuckles whitened around the pen. Another what? The answer came like a draft through the room, colder than the tiles, heavier than the silence. A life. The clipboard slid from Daniel's hands, clattering to the floor. His pulse roared in his ears. For the first time in his career, he wished the dead had stayed silent. The corpse's words still clung to the air of life. Daniel's body quivered with the weight of them, as though the syllables themselves had mass, pressing into his chest, anchoring his lungs. On the gurney, the dead man leaned forward. His skin creaked with every motion, but the stiffness was loosening. Veins that should have collapsed swelled faintly, as if blood whispered beneath them. His lips cracked wider, twitching toward a smile. "You will give it," the corpse rasped, "or I will take it." Daniel backed toward the door, his palms slick against the steel handle. He twisted it violently. Nothing. The latch groaned but did not shift. He rattled it again, harder, shoulders straining. Still locked. The morgue was never locked from the inside. His throat tightened. He spun, searching for another exit air vent, emergency panel. Anything but the room had shrunk around him. The drawers where bodies waited seemed taller, their steel faces reflecting fractured versions of himself. The fluorescent bulbs hummed louder, shadows vibrating in their glow. "Not the door," the corpse said. Its voice was firmer now, less like a rasp, more like a man's. "There is no leaving." Daniel's back hit the counter. He fumbled blindly, grabbing the nearest instrument, a scalpel. His hand shook as he leveled it toward the figure on the gurney. "Stay back," he whispered, though his voice cracked, betraying him. The corpse tilted its head, eyes glassy but intent. "You would cut what is already empty?" Daniel's grip faltered. The scalpel looked pitiful, a toy in the cold light. He wanted to drop it, but fear welded it to his fingers. The corpse shifted again, its movements smoother, stronger. It swung its legs off the gurney, feet slapping against the tile with a wet sound. The air thickened instantly, the temperature plunging. Daniel's breath fogged, curling like smoke between them. The thing stood tall now, too tall. Its shoulders rolled back, spine stretching until bones cracked into place. Each sound echoed like knuckles popping inside Daniel's skull. "You must choose," it said. The voice was layered now, not one voice but many, as though every whisper in the morgue's drawers had joined it. "Return what was stolen, or give me yours." Daniel's knees buckled. His mind screamed, "This isn't real, this isn't happening," but his body knew better. His body shook with the certainty of prey cornered by a predator older than reason. He staggered sideways, lunging toward the desk phone. His gloved hand clawed the receiver, pressing it to his ear. Silence, not even static, only a faint breath echoing his own. He slammed it down, chest heaving. The corpse took a step closer. The sound of its heel against tile echoed like a hammer on a coffin lid. "Your life," it said, raising one skeletal hand. "Or another's, decide." Daniel shook his head, the scalpel trembling. I can't." The room pulsed darker. The lights flickered, buzzing, threatening to go out. The thermometer needle slid lower still. The air tasted metallic, like coins dissolved on his tongue. He stumbled to the nearest drawer, yanking it open. Inside lay another body, still wrapped in its sheet, its skin stiff with true death. Daniel's chest heaved. His thoughts scrambled. Could I give this one instead? Could I? The corpse's voice snapped like a whip. "Empty flesh will not do." Daniel slammed the drawer shut, his breath shuddering. He felt the scalpel slipping from his sweaty grip. His vision blurred, spots of black looming at the edges. The corpse moved closer. Its breath rattled the air between them, cold enough to sting Daniel's face. Its glassy eyes bore into him, not with sight but with hunger. "You must give," it whispered, "before I take." Daniel's back pressed against the wall, his legs folding beneath him. The scalpel clattered to the tile. He sobbed once, a sound he didn't recognize as his own. And in the echo of that sob, he realized the morgue was no longer a room. It was a mouth, and it was closing around him. The corpse loomed only a step away. Daniel pressed against the wall, legs buckling, breath ragged in his throat. The fluorescent light flickered weakly above them, buzzing like a dying insect. Then the figure's hand rose. Its skin cracked with the motion, bones creaking, but its palm unfurled slowly, deliberately. Resting there, cupped like a fragile insect, was something small. Daniel squinted, his vision swimming. At first it looked like nothing, a speck, a trick of the light. Then it pulsed, a faint glow, pale as frost. shimmered in the corpse's palm. It was no larger than a bead, translucent, quivering, giving off a light that didn't illuminate so much as shiver against the darkness. The corpse's voice lowered, steadier now. This is what they took. Daniel's stomach turned. His hands trembled. He whispered, "What? What is it?" The figure leaned closer, the glow of the object reflecting in its glassy eyes. "My soul." The words were simple, final. Daniel's breath hitched. He shook his head, lips quivering. "That's impossible. Souls don't." But the corpse pressed the bead closer, so near he could feel its chill against his skin. Cold unlike winter, cold that reached inward. "Without it," the corpse said, "I wander, empty, hungry, until I am whole again." Daniel gagged on the silence, bile burning in his throat. His hands pressed uselessly against the tiles. He wanted to run, but his legs refused. His body was already trembling with something deeper than fear. The bead pulsed again. Once, twice. With each flicker, Daniel's chest clenched tighter, as if the glow synced with his heartbeat. "You will return it," the corpse whispered, "or you will give me yours." Daniel's vision blurred. He saw himself reflected in the steel drawers, the wide eyes, the trembling mouth, the sweat dripping down his face. He saw the figure behind him too, pale, ruined, yet alive in ways it shouldn't be. And then, slowly, the corpse began to unravel. Its skin darkened first, turning gray, then black. Its edges blurred, dissolving into shadow. The bead of light remained steady in its palm, suspended even as the body collapsed into vapor. The gurney groaned as the last of its weight slipped away. The morgue lights flickered once more, and the corpse was gone. Only the darkness remained. It clung to the corners, pooled against the floor, stretching tall against the ceiling, a shadow deeper than night itself, without shape, without limit. The bead of light hovered within it, pulsing, casting faint ripples against the black. Daniel's heart thundered. His mind screamed, "Don't move, don't look," but his gaze was locked. Then, in the whisper of that endless dark, came the truth. "Yours," it breathed. Daniel's chest seized. The air vanished from his lungs. He clutched at his throat, gasping soundlessly. The glow pulsed faster, matching his failing heartbeat, drawing it out, tugging at something deep within him. And he knew. The thing hadn't come to find what was stolen. It had come to replace it. The soul it wanted now was his. The last thing Daniel felt was the bead pressing against his sternum, sliding inward, impossibly, as the shadow folded around him. Then the morgue lights snapped off, and the room went silent. Story 7. The last croissant. The restaurant was nearly empty. Outside, winter pressed against the glass with a white breath, snow falling in lazy spirals that caught the yellow glow of the street lamps. Inside, the lights were dim, their warmth dulled by a silence that stretched too wide. No music, no clinking of dishes from the kitchen, only the sound of a single clock ticking near the register. Daniel, the father, pulled out a chair for his wife, Rebecca, before lowering their daughter, Emily, into hers. The chairs scraped against the floor louder than they should have, the sound echoing through the hollow dining room. "This place is quieter than I expected," Rebecca murmured. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, as though the cold had followed them inside. "It was the only one still open," Daniel said, forcing a smile. His voice was low, as though matching the hush of the place. He glanced at Emily, who was staring at the empty tables around them with wide, uncertain eyes. "Besides, it'll be quick. Just a bite before the drive." Emily leaned forward, whispering, "Why's no one here?" Her words carried farther than they should have. The family glanced instinctively around, but the restaurant remained empty. Rows of chairs tucked neatly under tables, place settings untouched, candles unlit. Then, without sound, the waiter appeared. He didn't emerge from the kitchen doors or walk in from the lobby. He was simply there, beside their table, a menu already in hand. His uniform was immaculate black vest, crisp white shirt, sleeves pressed flat, but his face was pale, his smile tight, as though it hurt to hold. "Good evening," he said. His voice was polite, measured, but hollow. "Welcome. A table for 3. Daniel nodded, uneasy. "Yes, thank you." The waiter's eyes lingered on the 4th chair at their table, the one no one had pulled out. Then, without comment, He set down the menus, 4 of them, spreading them across the table with practiced ease. Rebecca frowned. "We only need 3. The waiter paused, just for a breath, then offered the same taut smile. "Of course. My mistake." He gathered one back, but his fingers trembled slightly as he slid it away. The family ordered light soup for Rebecca, a sandwich for Daniel, pasta for Emily. The waiter nodded, jotting nothing down, though his hand hovered over the notepad as if it mattered. When he left, the silence settled again. Emily toyed with her napkin, folding and unfolding it. "I don't like it here," she whispered. Daniel reached across, squeezing her hand. "It's just empty, sweetheart. That's all." But even as he said it, his eyes drifted to the vacant chair. The one the waiter had looked at. The one still sitting slightly apart, angled as if expecting someone late to arrive. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably. Why would he bring 4 menus? "Probably a habit," Daniel said quickly. "Probably nothing." But his voice carried a crack, and Rebecca noticed. They ate quietly when the food arrived. The soup steamed faintly, but carried no aroma. The sandwich was neatly cut, its insides indistinct. Emily twirled her pasta, but her fork clicked oddly against the plate, like porcelain thinner than glass. Halfway through the meal, the waiter returned. He was smiling again. His hands were steady now, and on the silver tray balanced carefully before him were 4 croissants, golden brown, flaking at the edges, the smell of butter filling the air in sudden, heavy waves. He placed them down one by one. "One for you," he said, sliding it in front of Daniel. "One for you," in front of Rebecca. "One for you," in front of Emily. And then, the 4th, laid carefully on the empty plate before the vacant chair. The family froze. Daniel cleared his throat, his voice caught between politeness and unease. "We didn't order those." The waiter looked puzzled, his smile stiffening. "Of course you did. 4 croissants. 4 guests." Rebecca's stomach turned. "No, we're 3. The waiter's eyes flicked to the empty chair again, then back to them. His smile didn't falter, but his tone sharpened, as if correcting a mistake too obvious to bear. "You are 4. The words landed like ice across the table. Emily whimpered softly, pushing her plate away. Daniel reached for her hand again, but his own fingers were trembling now. Rebecca's voice dropped to a whisper. "Daniel, that chair. It's been set since we arrived." And for the first time, Daniel realized she was right. Daniel's fork clattered against the plate. He didn't mean to drop it, but his fingers had gone numb. The sound was deafening in the hush of the dining room, echoing against the walls like metal striking bone. Rebecca pushed her chair back, her voice unsteady. "No, take it away. We didn't ask for that." The waiter stood perfectly still, tray balanced at his side. His smile remained, but his eyes shifted toward the untouched croissant. Emily leaned closer to her mother, whispering through trembling lips, "Mommy, it's staring at us." Rebecca's throat tightened. "Please," she repeated louder now. "Take it away." The waiter inclined his head, a polite nod that did not reach his eyes. He reached out, fingers hovering just above the plate in front of the empty chair. But before he could lift it, the chair scraped backward. Slow, deliberate. The legs shrieked against the floor as if pulled by unseen hands. The sound was sharp enough to rattle the silverware, to make Emily clap her hands over her ears. Daniel shot to his feet, his chair toppling behind him. "What the hell?" The waiter didn't flinch. He simply straightened, tray steady, his face fixed in that strained, brittle smile. The empty chair dragged itself back another inch, then another. It was no longer simply sitting at the table. It was receding, as though something had hooked it from behind and was tugging it, inch by inch, toward the shadows between the other tables. Rebecca clutched Emily close, her voice cracking. "Daniel, do something." Daniel lunged, grabbing the chair's armrest. His knuckles whitened as he tried to hold it steady, but the pull was stronger. Slow, patient, implacable. The wood groaned under his grip. "Stop it," he barked, his voice trembling. "Stop this now." The waiter finally spoke, his voice calm but wrong, like a recording played half a beat too slow. "It isn't mine to stop." Daniel's heart thundered. His arms strained as the invisible pull dragged the chair farther, sliding under his grip until he lost hold entirely. The chair skidded back several feet, then halted in the dim light of the far wall. Silence fell. The croissant still sat neatly on the plate, untouched, Steam curled from its golden crust as if it had just left the oven. Emily whimpered again, her voice muffled against Rebecca's sleeve. "I don't want it here." Rebecca's eyes brimmed with tears. "Please," she begged, turning to the waiter. "Take it away. Just take it." The waiter gave a shallow bow, then moved toward the table once more. He reached for the plate, but the chair lurched, dragged farther this time, faster, straight into the shadows at the edge of the dining room, where the candles on the tables had not been lit. The croissant rattled against the plate but did not spill. The chair vanished into the dark like a swallowed breath. Daniel staggered back, his chest heaving, hands trembling at his sides. He wanted to run, but his legs would not obey. The waiter smoothed his vest, his pale face unreadable. "One was removed," he said softly. Rebecca's voice cracked. "Good, leave it that way." The waiter's smile twitched. He shook his head slowly. "No." He turned, disappearing toward the kitchen. His footsteps did not echo, as though the floor no longer acknowledged his weight. The family clung to one another in the suffocating silence, their eyes fixed on the space where the chair had been dragged away. Then, minutes later, the kitchen door creaked. The waiter returned. His tray gleamed under the dim light, and on it another croissant, perfectly golden, perfectly steaming. He placed it back onto the same table, sliding it gently before the empty space where the chair had been. "There are 4, he said, and this time, his smile almost broke into a grin. The croissant sat steaming on the white plate, buttery flakes glistening under the yellow light. The air smelled too rich now, cloying, heavy like it didn't belong to a restaurant at all, but to something sweeter, older, rotting beneath sugar. Rebecca whispered, her voice hoarse. "We have to leave." Daniel nodded, gripping Emily's wrist with one hand and reaching for his wife with the other. His chair scraped loudly as he stood. Then the 4th chair returned. Not sliding, not dragged this time. One moment the space was empty. The next it was there, tucked neatly at the table again, as if it had never left. Emily gasped, pulling closer to her mother. Her small hand trembled against Rebecca's arm. Daniel froze. His throat tightened as his eyes adjusted to the dim. The chair wasn't just back. It was occupied. No figure sat there visibly. No body. No flesh. But the impression of weight pressed into the cushion. The faint shift of fabric under invisible form. The wooden legs creaked as though bearing someone's presence. The tablecloth wrinkled slightly, pulled toward that side of the table. Rebecca's lips parted in a silent prayer. Emily's fork slid from her plate, clattering against the floor. She didn't stoop to pick it up. Her eyes were wide, locked on the chair. Daniel tried to steady his voice. "We're done. We're leaving." But when he reached for Emily, she flinched, not from him, but from the space beside him, where cold air had gathered, prickling against her skin. The waiter stood just behind the 4th chair, hands folded neatly in front of him. His eyes flicked to the croissant, then back to the family. His smile was wider now, though it strained the skin at the edges. "Your party is complete," he said softly. Daniel slammed his hand on the table. Plates rattled, the sound sharp in the suffocating silence. "No, we're 3. The waiter tilted his head. His smile didn't fade, but something beneath it shifted like a mask that had cracked just slightly. From the empty chair, a sound rose. Not a voice, not yet. A creak of wood as if someone had shifted their posture, followed by the faintest sigh long, drawn, ancient. Rebecca grabbed Daniel's arm, her nails biting into his skin. "Daniel, please don't look at it." But he couldn't stop. His eyes fixed on the chair, on the subtle depression in the cushion, on the way the air shimmered faintly above the plate, steam curling as though curling around a face unseen. And then, for a flicker, the shimmer condensed. The shape of a shoulder, the curve of a head. Nothing whole, nothing clear, just the suggestion of a man blurred and faint, like glass fogged by breath. Emily whimpered. "Who is he?" The waiter answered calmly, almost gently, as though the question had been rehearsed for years. "He is the guest of honor." Daniel's knees weakened. The croissant on the 4th plate cracked softly, as though pressure had been applied by unseen fingers. Flakes scattered, butter glistening against the white porcelain. The family huddled close, their breaths shallow, their eyes wide with the certainty that someone else now sat among them, and that someone was hungry. The 4th chair creaked again, This time it wasn't subtle. The wood bent, the legs strained, as if weight far heavier than human had pressed into it. The sound split the silence like bones snapping underfoot. Daniel staggered backward, knocking his own chair over. Rebecca clutched Emily to her chest, rocking as though to shield her, though nothing could shield them from what sat across the table now. The shimmer had thickened. What had been only an impression before a blur of breath, a fold in the air was condensing into form. Shoulders squared, heavy, draped in a shadow that resembled fabric, the slope of a head, thin strands of hair that were not hair at all but drifting wisps of smoke, and in the hollow where a face should have been, the faint outline of a mouth stretching, almost smiling. Emily screamed, a thin cry muffled against her mother's arm. Daniel's voice cracked. "Stay away from us." And the waiter did not move. He stood behind the figure, hands folded neatly, his smile stretched unnaturally wide. He seemed almost relieved, as though the evening had finally found its rhythm. "Dinner," he said softly, "is served." The croissant on the fourth plate split open, steam hissing into the air. The smell grew thicker. Nauseating rich butter turned sour, clinging to their throats. Rebecca gagged, clutching Emily tighter. Her eyes burned with tears. "Daniel, please get us out of here." Daniel lunged for the door. He ran past the rows of empty tables, but the distance seemed to stretch with every step, the entrance receding farther away like a hallway that would not end. His shoes slapped against the floor, echoing louder, faster, until he tripped and fell hard onto his knees. Behind him, the scraping began. The chair was moving, not dragged this time, not pulled, it was walking. The legs bent, shifted, pressed deliberately against the floor, carrying the thing that sat in it forward. Each scrape of wood was purposeful, steady. Closer. Daniel scrambled up, chest heaving. He spun back toward his family. Rebecca's face was pale, her knuckles white around Emily's shoulders, and behind them, the chair advanced. The figure seated upon it had grown clearer still. Its torso heaved faintly, as though mimicking breath. Its hands, shadow-made flesh, rested on the arms of the chair, long fingers curling and uncurling. The smile stretched wider, reaching the edges of what should have been cheeks, though no skin held it there. Emily sobbed, voice high and cracking. "Daddy, it's looking at me." Daniel's stomach lurched. He rushed forward, shoving the table with all his strength. Plates clattered, soup spilled, the croissant toppled. The table skidded inches across the floor, but the fourth chair did not budge. It sat rooted, alive, immovable, and the figure upon it leaned forward, its faceless mouth opening, though no sound emerged, until the mirrors caught it. At the far end of the dining room, the massive mirror gleamed faintly under the low lights. For a moment, Daniel saw their family's reflection there, three huddled shapes, pale and terrified. Then the reflection shifted. The family was gone. Only one figure remained, an old man, hunched but regal, seated in the fourth chair. His skin was gray, his eyes sunk deep, and his smile was stretched too far. His bony hand rested on the croissant, fingers tapping slowly, patiently, as though keeping time. Daniel's knees weakened. His breath stuck in his chest. Rebecca clutched Emily closer, her lips moving in silent prayer, and the waiter whispered, almost with reverence, "At last, the family is whole." The dining room was silent but for the ticking of the clock near the register. Daniel's chest rose and fell in ragged heaves. Rebecca clutched Emily so tightly the child whimpered against her shoulder. The fourth chair no longer scraped forward, it had settled again, perfectly aligned with the table. But the air around it was heavier, pressed with the weight of something unseen yet undeniable. Daniel's eyes lifted, against every instinct, toward the far end of the room. The mirror. The glass glowed faintly in the dim light, hazed by age, its surface stretching floor to ceiling. He expected to see three terrified figures staring back at him himself. Rebecca, Emily, proof they still existed, proof they still belonged to themselves. But the reflection showed none of them. Instead, seated in the fourth chair, was a man, old, hollow-cheeked, hair thin and colorless, slicked back against a skull too sharp beneath the skin. His suit was dark, outdated, frayed at the cuffs, as though he had worn it for decades without ever rising from that chair. And his mouth was smiling, wide, rigid, a smile stretched so far it seemed to tear the edges of his face. His teeth were too many, crowding behind pale lips. His eyes, sunk deep into shadow, gleamed faintly as though lit from within. Daniel staggered backward, his heel catching on a chair leg. "No." His voice was a whisper, strangled. "No, that's not." Rebecca's gaze was locked on the glass, tears streaming down her face. "Daniel, we're gone. We're not there." Emily lifted her head, just enough to see. Her tiny gasp cut the silence. "He's sitting in our place." The old man in the mirror raised his hand, slow and deliberate. His bony fingers tapped once on the table, right beside the croissant. The plate rattled faintly in the real room. As if echoing his movement, Daniel's legs nearly gave out. His breath tore free in sobs. Then the whisper came, not from the waiter, not from the air, not from the figure itself. It came from everywhere, from the walls, the floor, the glass, from inside their own chests. "Chào mừng các bạn đến với gia đình mới của tôi." The words draped over them like a shroud. Soft, intimate, final. Rebecca closed her eyes, burying Emily's face against her chest. Daniel tried to move, to scream, to fight, but his body no longer answered him. The mirror darkened, swallowing the old man's smile last of all. The croissant on the table steamed one final curl of butter-scented air, and the clock near the register ticked on, steady, as though nothing at all had changed. You've heard them all now. 7 stories carried through the storm, 7 shadows stitched into the silence of midnight. Perhaps you felt the chill, perhaps you felt the weight. But know this, what you've heard tonight does not simply end because the telling is over. There are stories that loop back on themselves, stories that breathe, that wait, that whisper when the room grows quiet. Some doors, once opened, will never close again, and some tales can never truly end. So, if the silence feels heavier when I leave you, if the room feels less empty than it did before, remember, you are not alone. The stories stay, they linger, and they will wait for you, the way the storm waits outside. Good night. Sleep, if you can,